Hey, with you evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it.
It was a great present for my 14th birthday. A real telescope. It's a combination telescope, so you can look at the stars and anything else. And it's got a great looking glass with a red dot. That means it focuses itself. And with a built-in prism. It gets the image right, not upside down. Why did my father have the idea to splurge on such a gift? Frank did not know himself. Never had a craving for the stars, and in the sky could only find a big bear. But he assembled the telescope himself. It turned out to be not so difficult with such a sensible instruction, and even the finder was quickly installed. The danger was all right. The very words caressed the ear both scientifically and romantically. You could fool the girls. Once he had a question how to find the right place through a telescope. It focuses on a single point in the sky. It wasn't such a stupid question. You need a special device? A finder. That sounds even cooler than a correlator. The same telescope, only with a small magnification and a large view to quickly point to the right place. And if that very property is achieved, then where you lead the finder, that's where the telescope will look. Frank about Mao was checking all this, but found nothing particularly interesting in the sky with rare stars. Then he took out the seeker and pointed it at the windows of the house opposite. In his hands, the image bounced around, so he set the seeker on the windowsill. He had to put a thick book underneath. What he saw shocked him. The face of the man at the window turned out to be that of his father. Sitting down on the floor, Frank maximized the image. Someone must have rang the doorbell there, because his father went to the back of the room. The lights came on. A guest walked in, a beautiful young girl. Frank's ears flamed. It appeared that he was peeping on his father. Not only was his presence preventing him from making serious acquaintances, but this. He went into the kitchen, windows that looked the other way. While I was drinking tea, a simple thought occurred to me. My father's a painter. Maybe he has a studio across the street. Ran to the finder. He is. He's at the easel, quickly flickering brush in hand. So it's a job to argue, but something was bothering my father. The girl changed her pose often. On her side, facing away or facing the painter, or sitting half-turned. Clothes too. The blouse was taken off. A handkerchief was thrown on. One shoe was left, but she did not undress to the end. The underwear was not removed. At exactly 10:30 p.m., after working for 3 hours, the girl left the studio. Frank felt tired beyond belief, like he'd been carrying bags of sugar. You bet it was like he was posing and drawing at the same time, and I think he realized something. Dad was looking for beauty, wanting to put it on canvas. With the girl coming out, Frank slipped out of the apartment too. It's a little late for such a beauty to be out alone in the city at night. By the third class, Frank was already trying to catch up with this girl. But where did she go? How to defend what on the vertical wall of the climbing club? But he was spotted. The kid said, "Miranda, you got a week. Pump your feet, pump your toes, and then maybe take in rock climbing." For the first 2 days, he learned confidence at a meter. If you are confident at 1 meter, you will be confident everywhere, said the instructor Peter. Already later, Frank learned that of the 3 places under consideration, they had chosen it because of him, and beautiful, and just right for a complete amateur. He was looking at it. I told Peter, "It's beautiful." And then her hooks flew off. I fell off. At the top, there was an instructor's safety rope. It's not high hill. That's when the hooks tore out of the slots, and under the weight of her falling body. Frank is 20 meters down. It was 15 degrees short of vertical. When she heard a noise from above, she nestled against the surface. Fingers were digging into the ground, reaching for the shot. He managed to lift his head. Miranda was just pushing off the rocky wall and 2 meters above him, trying to circle him in the fall. "Who are you taking?" "Stupid," thought Frank, pulling away from the surface and onto his outstretched arms and catching about the flying body of his shoulder bag. It cushioned the blow, but the crunch of his fingers smashed his forehead into the moss-covered rock. For a few seconds, nearly passing out from the exertion, he hit against the wall, feeling with horror as her body slid down slowly. Thankfully, Peter was already dragging. He did lose consciousness then. Apparently, the body, freed from excessive pressure, allowed itself to shut down, and Frank's body slowly crept down, gradually gaining speed. But there was only a little distance to the river flowing under him, and he plunged into shallow water with uneven stones peeking out. Dimka drove them all away, taking Peter as his assistant. He, happy to be able to at least somehow mitigate his guilt literally on himself for dragging Frank, who had already come to himself and tried to walk independently, into her car. She lived in the neighborhood and rushed to her house on the way to call her mother. That surgeon had the bare minimum to help at home. When he found out who his father was, Miranda turned pale but called him. Had Frank thought of another reason why they had chosen the local Rockies? His father arrived a couple of hours or so later when Vanessa was just finishing up. They were having tea in the rather spacious kitchen. It's weird looking and under a lamp with a shade. Strange, but surprisingly cozy. The cookies turned out surprisingly good too. The tea is flavorful, and the shadows from the lampshade created a wonderfully magical atmosphere. I felt a mixed feeling at first, and at bread tea from a saucer. Miranda sparkled with eyes amazingly beautiful. She's quite an artist. Well, she and Dad are not strangers at all. Dad didn't see it. He's used to disguises. And strict Vanessa relaxed and said that everything was practically nothing, while looking into the eyes of the wild father. We'll need x-rays of the hands, though. See if there are any fractures. I just can't believe there aren't in a situation like this. And make sure you go to the hospital. This guy's forehead is pretty banged up. What's a concussion without a concussion? She looked at Frank skeptically for a second. Does that guy with the forehead smashed into our heads have a brain? It sure doesn't. Always rocks mountains. Necks in addition, but the main danger of the knee. Frank shouldn't have put it against a rock like that. That's what she said to Frank, which made him choke on his tea. Barely holding the cup wide empty renamed brushes, Miranda tossed it away, barely holding back from laughing. Apparently imagining Frank gently applying his knee, scrambling down with the sack. The same warily glanced at the doctor he was. Wouldn't the bound knee be claimed? And she had a crush on her father. She's making a presentation of her skills. He was already looking at the clock on the wall. It's getting dark, and it's a long way home, although Frank knew that Dad absorbs everything like a sponge. And if he was so careless, it meant that the presentation had reached its destination. What about Miranda? Unexpectedly, Frank's father enrolled in the institute. Father and Vanessa lived in the house across the street, but Frank was no longer using the telescope or the finder. Miranda was finishing her studies at the teacher's college. I don't know why. All day long she was gone. She was looking for fractions in her club or on expeditions. She often spent the night at Frank's place alone or with Pasha, or even with a small group. Frank understood everything. City was far away. The company said all the money for life. Sometimes they chatted. She always started it. She came into his room without knocking, climbed up with her feet in the chair, and silently looked at Frank, as if she was seeing him for the first time, and then she'd share some news or tortured problem and stay up half the night. For a while she was interested in the telescope. She herself almost figured it all out, and sometimes sat at it for hours. In my second year, just after New Year's Eve, Peter called. Miranda asked you to come by with some vitamins. There's a hospital in Mother's room, and disconnected. Frank was always surprised by the oranges in the bag. Mandatory program. He bought them too. And mango, banana, pear, lemon, and he grabbed a knife. The dining room's this way. She was a sight to behold, but there were enough eyes. They were planted when he showed up in the room. Maybe he addressed it to his mother. Peeked out from behind the wild shoulder, slipped right out, and on his way. All the greens were clearly predominant. This time the emerald color was almost sunny. What are you so happy about? Before Nut wanted to add, he wanted to add, but held back. Suddenly she is not inadequate now. Vitamin and you. It was not easy for her to speak, but she tried not to speak. Frank carefully placed a chair on the bed. Mother was worried about everything. It flashed in his mind. A separate room with evil. Not even a refrigerator or a TV. Not to mention the tables and chairs. He sat down. Took out his 10th plate and smiled, and around the day-long movie and eyes. Then he went and washed his hands and, returning one by one, began to cut and slice off each fruit. Arranged them in a circle. Looked at his hands, renamed and twice as thick as his then. They dig in with the 2 tubes on his chest. Your mouth opens. When? How? He began to put slices gently into the open mouth. Tell me below, Moja. You won't believe it. Curiosity killed me, she whispered slowly. Favorite Elbrus children's height around 3. We stand with Sasha on a ledge behind the back of the rock meters 200 up and 10-15 down. To the left is a cliff, and it seems something strange there on the left behind the rock, or flashed, or something else. There's no safety net on the left, so Peter holds my hand, and I'm looking over the edge of the rock to the left. So I came back. He fell on the snow and rolled like a cucumber, and I fell down the cliff into some crevice. Well, it's covered with snow. And who got you out? That flying saucer did. I wasn't thinking straight, I was freezing. There was a triangular-shaped light overhead, then the hospital. Peter says they found it in the snow under that concession where he slapped himself. Why did you bring the lemon? You're out of your mind. Kickle all right. Frank thought with a suppressed soot. He remembered suddenly, as then on the cliff and City looked up, and she tried to push off the almost vertical wall so as not to knock him down, and how her face had struck him. Not a drop of fear of confusion, just determination and spiritedness. He wondered then if this was the beauty his father had been looking for. And now Miranda appeared to him surprisingly beautiful and filled with light. It came from her eyes. You think they remade me. He didn't think anything. It was incredible. Walking like that, she made the image complete. It was the first time he wanted to capture beauty on canvas. Her beauty, though he'd thought about it more than once, starting with that peek through the telescope finder. 4th year, Vanessa calls. We're at the airport flying to Wyoming. Money expedition got hit. You'll find us there. Frank translated, flying with your father. I have no doubt that you and the one who joined. This time the ward was packed to the brim. Miranda forbade his mother from choosing a private room. Right eye is booby-trapped. Left leg in a cast suspended from a hook. But the left eye stung no fainter than the two. Her bed was the last one, but not up against the wall. Just enough for him to fit on that side of the edge of the bed. Just him and her second. That's something to behold. Beside me carried a round stone like a cannonball. I clung to it and wouldn't let go. Where's it going? That's where I'm going. For a minute, maybe 2 minutes, the stream completely covered us. I thought it was over. With a cannonball that saved me threw him ashore, and me as a fish and a dead belly. All the puzzles came together, and Frank announced his idea as a thesis assigned to the teacher. He looked as if doomed and did not interfere. His father gave an exhibition and allocated a small corner to his son. He hung his polyptych happiness of 6 paintings. All day Frank waited. He stood leaning against the wall, away from his composition. People gathered in flocks, some shaking, some looking at him with incomprehensible eyes. The bulk of them crowded around his father's paintings. Miranda came in the middle of the second exhibition day. Quite quickly she walked through all 6 paintings, attracting people by her similarity to their heroine. Then she came back and froze for a long time at the first one, where she tried to fly past the boy who flew to the rock. She came quite close, looking only at the expression of her eyes. At the next painting she hummed and almost passed, but caught her own gaze from the painting and froze again. At the penultimate one, where she was surrounded in the mud, in the stream, in the embrace of the core, she laughed and looked back at Frank and then disappeared. At 8 p.m., Frank finally got ready to go home. On his way out, a female figure jumped up to him, picked him up by the arms and spun him around. He didn't mind. Recognizing his girlfriend Miranda, and a very funny little guy, she sang it very much, but convinced. I'm done with mountains. Suddenly I wanted to go to the babies.